Welcome to Flash Basics 1, Intro to Flash. In this video, we're just going to take a tour around the Flash interface and get to know where things are and how some of the functions work in Flash, some of the tools. So the first thing I wanted to show you is the stage. This white box in the center of our screen is the stage. And everything that we do inside the stage will be rendered, and so everything outside the stage will not be rendered at all. So make sure all the animation is inside your stage. So to navigate around the stage, we want to press the space bar. This will allow us to pan right, left, up, and down any direction. And to zoom, we press the Z key. This will allow us to click and zoom in. If you want to zoom back out, you have to hold Alt to zoom back out. You could also select a certain region to zoom into, and it'll snap us right into that region. So I'll just Alt zoom to get back out. Let's head up to the toolbar. On the far left, the hotkey for the selection tool is V. This will allow you to select any element inside the stage. This is the sub-selection tool, and the hotkey for that is A. We don't use that too much in animation unless we're building something, but what it does basically, if we activate the sub-selection tool and we select a line, it'll allow us to edit that curve or edit that line, and it'll give us a spline handle where we can more specifically manipulate the curve. Now I'm just going to Control Z out of that. I'll use it on occasion if I'm building a new body part. Say I need a hand for a character. I might use that for a specific part. Okay, next is our free transform tool. We can click there or we can hit Q. It created a square box around our artwork. I'm just going to select the whole thing. Now this tool we use quite a bit in animation because of course we're moving things around and keying them. So the way to use the free transform tool, now if you hover near one of these corners, you'll see the cursor turns into a 3/4 circle. This will allow you to rotate your object, which is kind of hard to see with a circle. Let's do it to the square. There, so it'll rotate it. If you go next to one of these manipulation points, you can scale your object. In between the manipulation points, it'll turn into this little symbol, and that'll allow you to skew. If you grab it anywhere inside the box, you can move it around. And then your pivot point in the center you can grab and move as well. If you move the pivot point, obviously your selection will pivot around that point. And then you can double click on the pivot point to place it back in the center. Now one thing I should point out, if you want to maintain your volume of the shape, you can hold Shift down, grab the corner, hold down Shift, and it'll maintain the volume without changing it. Whereas if we grab it anywhere from the corner here and we don't hold Shift down, it'll change its shape, which you don't want. If this was a character's head, you wouldn't want it to do that, unless of course you're squashing and stretching it on purpose. Next we have our lasso tool, and that'll just allow us to select specific sections of our artwork, and then we can hit V and move them off. Next is the text tool, which you would just tap T on the keyboard for, and of course you can type with that. And this is our line tool. You can get to that by pressing N on the keyboard, and that just allows us to create lines on the stage. Right next to that is our rectangle tool, and you can press R on the keyboard to get to that, and that just allows us to create these boxes that we have on the stage. You can hold Shift down to constrain the volume, or you can just click and drag to specify your box shape. And right next to that is our oval tool. You can press O on your keyboard to get to that. And again, same thing, you can hold Shift down to constrain the volume, the X and Y properties, or you can just click and drag and specify your oval shape. Right next to that is our pencil tool. I don't use this too often, but you can use it to draw lines, and then you can edit them, same as the line tool. A brush tool is B. That'll allow us to create a brush stroke. And then the fill tool, which we can use to fill any object with any color we like. The eyedropper allows us to pick a color from anywhere on the stage. Eyedrop it here, and then click again over here, and it'll fill it with the color we chose. Then there's the eraser, which is E on your keyboard. Pretty straightforward, it erases. And then we already covered the pan and magnifying glass. Over here we have our stroke color. I'm going to call it line color. we can choose the color before we create the line, or you can change the color after you've created the line. Or the fill, you can change the color here with the fill. And over here we can just swap the colors for fill and line. This little magnet symbol is snap to objects. Say for example this is a character's arm. And we don't want it to rotate this way. We want it to rotate at the elbow. So what I can do is turn on the snap to objects, grab your pivot point, and you'll see there's an invisible grid on the stage, which this pivot point will now snap to, the points, and we can snap it right to the corner and say that's, like I was saying, that's a character's elbow. Now we can pivot right from that spot, and you can see how that would be very handy in animation. If you turn the snap to objects off, you can move this around freely without it snapping and place it wherever you like. But I like to use the snap to objects for when I'm moving pivot points on a character's body. So that pretty much covers the toolbar. Over to our left, we can uncollapse this panel by hitting these little arrows. And here we just have some color swatches. You can change the color just like you can on the toolbar. It's kind of redundant, really. And then here we have swatches where you can choose individual colors. I'm just going to put that away. I never use that, to be honest with you. Over to the right side, we have properties and library. So whatever we have selected on the stage, it'll show the properties, and you can see the color yellow in the fill here because I have my yellow fill selected in our square. If I select any line, it'll give us the line color. That's under fill and stroke. Position and size, this just gives us our X and Y position values on the stage. X and Y, so Flash is 2D software, so we only have X and Y coordinates. X is your right and left horizontal position, and Y is your up and down vertical position. We don't really worry about that too much unless I'm trying to copy. If I want to copy the position of one object to another, I can select these and Control C, Control V, copy and paste these onto another object to get it to be in the same position. But I don't use that very often. Next, we have width and height. Obviously, that's pretty self-explanatory. This circle is this exact same width and height. And then, if we select our line, we can, like I said earlier, change the line color, or you can change the stroke width by using this slider. You can see the line getting a lot thicker, or you can specify here by going, I want a line thickness of 3, and it works that way as well. You can also change the line style. I don't use this very often, but we'll just zoom in to show you. Select that line, and this is ragged, we have dotted. I really just keep it on solid most of the time. We can also, under properties, change our stage color. If we don't have any objects selected and we just click on the stage, you can change your stage color to gray or any other color you like. I just keep it on white all the time. And we can also change our stage size. If I want to edit this, say I want it to be 1920 by 1080. There it is, it's huge. So now our stage is 1920 by 1080 pixels. And then we have our library here on this tab to the right. Now right now we don't have anything in the library, but we will in the next lesson. Once we convert some of these things to symbols, they'll be in our library, and really the library is just a collection of everything that we have in our file, in our scene, and we can drag things from the library onto the stage, so it's kind of handy to have that there. This is the timeline up here. When you open up Flash, you'll have your initial layer, it'll just say layer 1. This is where you do all of your animation. We can add new layers by clicking this little button here. Looks like a page. Every time you click it, you'll add a new layer. You can rename the layers by double-clicking on the name and just typing in whatever you want to call the layer. You'll notice the time marker here. If you try to scrub it, you can't move it. You actually have to add by clicking anywhere on the timeline, however long you want your animation to go on, just by going right-click and insert frame, and it will actually insert frames that you can animate on. And then to set a key, we don't have anything on our layer at all. If you want to put something on the layer, you can just create a shape. As soon as you create a shape, you'll notice there's a black dot here. That means that this layer is now full. It has something in it. And you can create keyframes on this layer simply by pressing F6 to set a key. We'll get more into animation in a future class. You can also hide these layers by clicking on this little eye. Actually, clicking the eye at the top will hide all the layers. You'll see all the X's. Or if you can hide individual layers by clicking on the little dots underneath the eye on any individual layer. You can also lock the layers so you don't accidentally select anything. Now we can't select this ball. If you unlock it, you can select it. This little icon right beside the lock allows you to go to show layers as outlines, and if you click the top one, it'll do all the layers, and you can do one at a time as well, and it just shows you the outline of the object. You can delete layers simply by right clicking and go delete layers, or you can go to select the layer you want to delete and hit the trash can. You can play your animation here by clicking play, or you can hit enter on your keyboard and it'll play the animation. We don't have any in here yet. You can see the time marker going down the timeline. These little buttons on either side of the play button will step one frame. You can also do that by pressing your greater than, less than keys right next to the M on the keyboard, and it'll step. You'll see the time marker stepping down the timeline one frame at a time. This little button brings you to the very last frame of your animation, and the button on the far left brings you to your very first frame. We'll just snap you right to it. This is to loop your animation. It'll give you a range which you can expand. If you hit play, it'll just loop that area. And we'll get into some of these other aspects later in the program. Right here, this tells you what frame you're on. And this gives you your frames per second, what your scene is set to, how many frames per second your animation is. And then you can slide down the timeline with this little bar. You can also, up here in the corner, you can scale your timeline. So say you want it to be smaller, you get tiny, small, normal. Tiny just brings all the frames closer together, and then small brings it further apart, and then normal. Some people like to animate with medium, so things are further apart. And you can keep changing this as you're animating too. But I like to just keep it on normal for most of the time. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is the difference between line and fill and what we can do with them. So let's create a line by pressing N on the keyboard, and then we're going to select our brush by pressing B. And you can change your brush size here, and you can change your brush shape here. Right now we're just going to keep it on circle. So I'll create a brush stroke. Now a brush stroke is just basically a smear of paint. Just like we had our in our other shapes here. This is fill, and these are lines. And these are the same thing. This is a line, and this is fill, just like this is fill. And they have the same functionalities. So basically in Flash, it's line and fill. The line, if we move our cursor near the end of it, it'll turn into this little, you'll see the symbol change beside it. That'll allow us to grab the ends of our lines and move them around. If we hover near the line, the symbol changes again to more of a curvy shape, and that allows us to bend our lines. The paint stroke is, like I said, it's just a smear of paint. It's not really editable in any desirable way. You can make these strokes thicker and thinner in some areas, but when you create a brush stroke, it does give you these spline handles. Just by selecting the sub-selection tool, you can see how this paint stroke is actually built. And you can manipulate it this way if you like, which we'll get into in a few more minutes. But as far as editing line work goes, the brush stroke is really not the way to do it. If you do have a Cintiq or a tablet, you can easily use the brush tool to just draw your elements. In a lot of productions, line is used to draw things, and it's converted to paint. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import a drawing. Import to stage. Now we're going to name this layer. We're going to call it drawing. Now what we're going to do is we're going to build our Flash line works over top of this drawing. So before we do that, we want to create a new layer, and we'll name this one line. So now you'll see that this layer has nothing in it, and the drawing layer obviously has the drawing in it. The reason why we're creating two different layers is because I want to be able to shut my drawing off as I'm putting Flash lines over top of it, just to check and make sure it's looking the way I'd like it to. So make sure that you're on the line layer, and then select your line tool by pressing N. And we're just going to get started with drawing. So what we're going to do is just click, drag, and release. And that line is way too thick. We're going to bring that right down to, I think, 3. That's good. So click, drag, and release your line. And you know what? Let's lock this drawing so we don't accidentally select it. Underneath the keypad, you can lock these layers. And just like I showed you with the line, you can bend these. But for now, we're just going to block this in. And as we discussed earlier too, by keeping the snap to objects on, it'll allow you to, when you create new lines, it'll allow you to make sure that the corners stay together and they're not off of each other like this. So again, we're going to block it in. Everything's just going to stay very angular, and then we're going to smooth it out later. A lot of times during animation production, when you're animating on a project, the characters that you receive may or may not have been built with a lot of hands or other feet and other body parts. If you're lucky, you might have a huge collection of hands, like 20. But sometimes you could have 3. You could have 3. You could have 30 hands, depending on the amount of time the character design team had to put the characters together. So after we block this all in, I'm just going to keep blocking it in. So oftentimes, this is the reason why I'm showing you this now, is you'll have to build your own hands as you're animating, because you might be posing your character in a specific pose and there's no hand for that pose. So you'll have to create your own. So now we can just go ahead and bend these lines. Now that we've blocked it all in, we'll just start bending them. And as we're going, periodically we can shut the line off, just to take a look at how our drawing's going, or how the flash lines are looking. One thing to point out is, as I was mentioning before, how we grab the end of the line. This happens too when we've connected lines together. You'll see that it creates like a little intersection here, and it brings the whole thing with it. So that's something to stay aware of. Say you don't want this line to be real angular like this, you can delete. Say if you select this section of the line and delete it, you can just go back to your drawing tool, make sure your snap to objects is on. Just click and drag and snap to each side of these lines, and then that way you can make a shorter line to make a more rounded corner. And then if you have a section like this where there's a small angle there, another way to smooth that out is to select the region around it. These 2 little buttons here, this is a smooth button. It's kind of an automated smooth. It doesn't always give you desired results. On some specific areas it will do a good job of smoothing your area, smoothing out the undesirable corner. So I'm just going to go through, keep grabbing corners and curves and bring them in. If you move closer to the beginning or end of one of the lines, it'll curve in a different way. If your snap is on, you can grab that end and just bring it right there. Also too, with snap on, you'll notice here we have the beginning and end of a line here. It's a corner. The snap on, if you move it in and out and release, sometimes now it becomes one solid line, and the beginning and end of those 2 lines just disappeared and it's one line now. That can be desirable or undesirable depending on where you're at in your drawing. Right now it's working out pretty well. So you get the idea. You can sit here and fiddle with it for a very long time. So let's just have a quick look at it. We can turn off our line. Okay, well, so one last thing I'd like to demonstrate, as we were talking about before, the different functionalities between line and fill. This is pretty much all we're going to get out of our line, out of the line tool, is a hand looking something like this. If you want to get more of a thick and thin look with the line work, we have to convert these lines to fill. So we'd have to create a new layer, and let's name this layer fill. So now we have our line layer and our fill layer. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select this entire line work. Make sure you have your drawing locked so you don't select it. We've only selected the lines. And just go to the key on the timeline where our line work is. Copy it, copy frames, go up to the fill where there's a blank keyframe there, and just right click and paste frames. So now what we've done is we've obviously copied it from the line layer and pasted it onto the fill layer. So now let's lock our line layer and hide it. We'll hide these 2, the drawing and the line. So now all we're looking at is the fill layer. Now this is still line work. All we're going to do is select all of it, go to Modify, Shape, Convert Lines to Fill. And that does exactly what it says it's going to do. It converts the lines into, these are now paint strokes. And the benefit of that is we can go into these, the ends of some of these lines and just pinch them. And most Flash productions I've worked on, they do this. It just gives it a nicer look. Gives it a little bit of depth with thick and thin line work. You might want to thicken out certain areas. Now this would be something you would spend some time on, but you get the idea. If you did want to go this route, this would be the drawing you would use. You would use the fill drawing, and in that case, for the line not to render, you can make this guide, and the line would always be on guide, and that way it won't render in the final animation, and you'll only see this nice thick and thin for your final piece of work.